I was really enjoying your storytelling. I was appreciating just having more of a sense of you and what's informing your work, and I think through your stories, I was getting a sense of that. So yeah, that sounds beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much. That's so helpful. Um, so where I was going with that, let me find it. The garden, we are all ready to blossom. And that is the impulse. And it's almost like the earth is pushing us upward. And for many years, I practiced a form of Buddhism called Nichiren Buddhism. And there was the description of of bodhisattvas rising from the earth. And it's like that. I think about trees as human beings from the plant family. And we're like, and once I was just aspiring to be someone through whom blessings unfold, and scented air and nourishment on all sorts of levels. And it was kind of avataric in my understanding of the original meaning of the word, which is the embodied descent of a very highly evolved being into flesh. Now it's our ego's projection in an artificial world. So it's sort of got flipped on its head. But that being the case, here's what my fairy says now that she's here. I am a fairy of the garden variety, which is not an easy thing to be in civilized society. It's challenging to fully flower when no one thinks you're real, and harder still to fit right in when you've two wings you must conceal. I had at first believed that all perceived exactly as I did, which is a natural conclusion that one makes when one's a kid. But most especially when the adult world refers to birds and bees, to introduce a child to nature's most delicious mysteries and to explain the way new branches grow on people's family trees. Well, I'd always known each leaf and stone had stories they could tell, and that the seas speak through the trees, just that the breeze speaks through the trees, just as the seas speak through a shell, because I share some roots with trees. I read their dancing leaves with ease and even sing with nightingales. My sisters called me Philomela. Just as the hummingbirds search flowers to find the lyrics to their song, so I would tune myself to crickets and go chirping all day long. For this was simply second nature, and I thought it what they meant. Can you imagine my amazement when I found out that they didn't? Well, I simply couldn't fathom how I'd gotten to this space, because my whole frame of reference comes from such a different place. I thought perhaps that I had wandered through the looking glass and pondered how to find my way back home again through this world of mirrors and paradox. I was born in upside down town to the king and queen of backward land. I spoke another language, which they had to twist to understand. The king was sowing sorrow and the queen was reaping grief. I held my dreams, but lost my way, confused beyond belief. How ossified the king in patriarchal misconceptions. and how brilliant was the queen in monumental self-deceptions. And I wish that I could say that they were singular exceptions, but they were the rule. So I know you'll confirm it with your reflections. It was as if I'd grown invisible by taking human form, which can lead anyone to wonder why they bothered to be born. I was perceived not as an entity with her own divine identity, but as a daughter who must be persuaded to conform. And that's page 1 of a very lengthy piece that describes and distills my life journey. And one of the reasons I got into sharing word magic in verse, I mean, our paths, I was just saying to someone, when we're on our path and we're following our magnetic boots, wearing our magnetic boots and navigating by magnetism, the allies who come in to offer support, so divine and synchronous and exquisitely beautiful. So I had written a manuscript in the 80s called Psychosemantics, English in Translation, spelled Trance-lation. No one was actually looking at things in the way that I was at that time that I know of. A few years later, a decade or more, I read a book, a collection of essays by advanced linguists on, in terms of university advanced. And a lot of them were about wordplay and in many languages, anagrams and puns and historically and et cetera, et cetera. But the point of it was I found a lot of validation for my intuitively derived perspective. However, I do believe I reached out to the editor and got a polite, condescending brush off. But I have sort of the sense that may be how they all treat each other, in some of the departments at a university. In any case, I was told, I brought in Psychosemantics, English in Translation. A very glib editor there was just rapidly fingering through the pages, glancing and saying, oh, all very interesting and consistent with semiotics and deconstructionism, which I had never heard of before. And he said, without a PhD, you can forget it. So I knew I wasn't going to go that route. And a few years later, I was a student of Reverend Michael Bernard Beckwith and of the Agape International Spiritual Center, quite well known, particularly in the States. In any case, in, I guess, completing a semester, we were supposed to do some creative expression of what this closer walk with God means to you. And so I was intimidated. I hadn't written a poem in many years. I considered it braiding the language. Didn't know if I could do that anymore. Just lack of self-worth and